Thanksgiving is a time of year when people sit in reflection upon wonderful memories of days gone by. It is a time of rejoicing, of celebration, of reestablishing the bonds of friendship and family. It is the pinnacle of our autumnal consciousness. But it is also a time when the specters and phantoms of the past emerge to dance as vague shadows along the stones of the amber-lit hearth, to flit as tattered shades through the dark, crisp November air. Blackwater Media presents A Haunted Thanksgiving. This is a weird story that happened to me back when I was a teenager. My grandparents had a really small farm located in a small hollow. It wasn't a commercial farm, just something they had to support themselves. However, when they got older and it was more difficult for them to maintain the farm, they quit using the barn. It just sort of sat there and was used as a storage area mainly. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, we would go out to our grandparents' house. Now, this story took place on Thanksgiving. I was 15 years old, and that's the age where I began not enjoying hanging out with the adults in my family anymore. Suddenly, listening to the stories of when I was a kid or when my parents were kids was just not that entertaining anymore. We had Thanksgiving dinner early. It was about 2 p.m. Afterward, I was beginning to feel a bit antsy. I let my parents know that I was going to go and explore the hollow a bit. It'd been a while since I'd done so. I didn't even think of asking my younger brother and sister if they wanted to go. It was fine because honestly, I felt like being by myself. I knew that I really didn't have a lot of time to explore before it got dark. So I set out and made sure I knew how far I could go and still get back before the sun had gone down. I didn't do the greatest job of it though. If you've ever been out exploring the woods, you might probably know what I mean. You can easily get fascinated with the woods and the hills and lose track of time. It got very, very dark before I was anywhere close to being home. By the time I got to the farm, it had been dark for at least an hour. I'd never been out by the barn when it was dark outside. It looked incredibly creepy. Now, being a teenage boy, I of course like scary things. The thought then occurred to me that if the barn was creepy looking on the outside, it must be creepy as hell on the inside, and I decided to check it out. Now, getting into the barn was simple. My grandparents rarely locked the door of their house, much less about locking the barn. They lived in a really safe area where crime was pretty much unheard of. The barn did have one of those heavy wooden locks on it. There's a name for it, but I forget what it's called. I was surprised that I was able to get the door open at all. I figured that the hinges had to be nearly rusted shut. So as I mentioned, the barn was old. And even when it was in use, my grandparents would only have been in it during the day. So there was no light. Thank God that I lived in the era of smartphones though, because I of course had a flashlight on my smartphone. I turned on the flashlight and just marveled at the creepiness. You know, if dark is creepy, then just a minor amount of light is that much creepier. I was fascinated by all the tools. So many sharp implements. Most of them were hanging up. However, there was a small hatchet lying on a workbench. It was discolored, and on closer inspection, I realized that it was coated in dry blood. Now, I don't know much about the slaughtering of animals, but I knew that my grandparents used to do it often. Chickens, pigs, and stuff. So I figured that the hatchet was used for that purpose, and they never cleaned it. The barn had a loft that was filled with hay, so I decided to climb the ladder and check it out. When I was shining the light around, it reflected off something buried in the hay. I was wondering if it was another tool or something and decided to check it out. Going over to it, I began moving the hay, and I screamed when the empty eye sockets of a long dead corpse were staring directly at me. I fell backwards and nearly fell off the loft. I quickly climbed down the ladder and ran out of the barn without closing the door. I rushed into the house and told my parents and grandparents about what I'd seen. My father, a huge man, like Hulk Hogan sized, went out to confirm what I told him. My grandparents phoned the sheriff's office. The body had been in the loft for about 3 years. It had several hatchet wounds on it that the police told us were caused by the hatchet I'd seen on the bench. The hatchet I picked up. So not only had I found a dead body, but I held an actual murder weapon in my hand. That was truly disturbing to me. But it wasn't nearly as disturbing as the realization my grandparents had that they had lived in the house for 3 years without knowing a dead body was in the barn. No one was ever caught, and we to this day have no idea who killed that man or why.